Every Thursday night, at precisely the same hour, the wounds would appear, 5 open sores, the stigmata, on the hands, feet and side of a young 21-year-old Italian woman, Gemma Galgani. Blood poured forth for hours, soaking bandages, staining the sheets. Doctors examined her with surgical instruments, with microscopes, with all the science of the 19th century, and found no explanation. Each Sunday, the wounds vanished without a scar. The skin was clean, intact, as if nothing had happened. The following Thursday, they would open again. For months, Gemma Galgani's body became a battleground between the explainable and the impossible. But before the stigmata, there was a life, and that life is perhaps even more astonishing than the marks themselves. Chapter 1. Italy ablaze. Faith and reason in the 19th century. Italy, the late 19th century. The newly unified peninsula was undergoing a transformation that shook its very foundation. The new state had stripped the Pope of his territories, closed convents, confiscated church property. It had declared war, not with cannons, but with laws and decrees on the Church's influence in public life. In universities, secular humanism was preached. In salons, the death of God was celebrated. In laboratories, it was proclaimed that science would soon explain everything, that superstition attributed to heaven. Auguste Comte and his disciples announced a new era where reason would reign supreme and faith would be extinguished like an unnecessary candle under the sun of progress. But Italy is a land of contrasts. While the intellectual elites of Rome, Milan, and Turin embraced materialism with the fervor of converts, in the hamlets, in the country parishes, in the homes where the crucifix hangs above the fireplace and the rosary beads mark the passing hours, another Italy persisted, an Italy that prayed, that went on pilgrimages, that believed with the stubbornness of those who knew that faith was not a relic of the past, but the only future worth hoping for. In Tuscany, land of cypresses and golden hills, the city of Lucca existed suspended between both worlds. Its Renaissance walls enclosed palaces, where modern philosophy was debated, and parishes, where medieval saints were venerated. In its streets, the apothecary who read Darwin coexisted with the widow who prayed the rosary at dawn. It was the perfect setting for a story that would defy all categories, because what was about to happen in Lucca would not fit either into the molds of science or into those of conventional piety. Chapter 2. A girl who looked beyond things. Gemma was born on March 12, 1878, in Camigliano, a small town near Lucca. She was the 5th of 8 children of Enrico Galgani, a pharmacist by trade, and a devout Catholic, and Aurelia Landi, a woman of deep piety and fragile health. The family enjoyed years of modest prosperity. The pharmacy provided enough to live with dignity and to educate the children in the faith. Gemma was, from the beginning, a different child, not different as the hagiographers describe when they want to create a saint, but truly different. At the age of 4, she memorized prayers with an ease that astonished her mother. At 5, when other girls played with dolls, she improvised small altars with flowers and stones. Her godmother would later recount that the little girl spent long periods in silence, staring intently at the image of the crucifix, with a gravity unbecoming of her age. She was not a sad child. She was a child who seemed to look beyond things. But death did not wait for Gemma to grow up. Aurelia, her mother, had been battling for years against consumption that was devouring her lungs. Gemma was 7 years old when the disease won. Before dying, the mother called the girl to her bedside. She took her hands in her own, with what little strength she had left, and told her something that Gemma would never forget. "My daughter, I entrust you to Our Lady. She will be your mother from now on." And on turning to the image of Our Lady of Sorrows that hung above the bed, she consecrated the girl with a prayer that was, at the same time, a last will and a prophecy. Gemma saw her mother die, and in that instant, something was sealed in her soul, an intimacy with pain that would accompany her all her life, not as a curse, as a vocation. Then came the years of downfall. Enrico's pharmacy declined, customers stayed away, debts accumulated. The family, who had known dignity, began to experience the shame of poverty. The children scattered. Gino, the older brother who was studying for the priesthood, died young of consumption, the same disease that had taken their mother. Gemma, who adored Gino, who saw in him the brother priest who would intercede for the family, received his death as a second collapse, and then the father. Enrico Galgani died in 1897, ruined and ill. Gemma was 18 years old, an orphan, without resources, without protection, without a visible future. The family that had been a home was now an archipelago of scattered survivors. At 18 years old, Gemma Galgani had nothing except a faith that instead of breaking under the weight of so much loss, had hardened like steel in the forge. Each blow, instead of destroying her, had refined her. Each death, instead of pushing her away from God, had pushed her more deeply toward Him, as if Providence were carving in her, with a chisel of pain, the exact shape of a vessel destined to contain something that the world was not prepared to understand. Chapter 3. Meningitis and the Miracle. Shortly after the death of her father, Gemma's body rebelled, or perhaps obeyed. The doctors diagnosed spinal meningitis, an inflammation of the membrane surrounding the spinal cord, which in the 19th century was practically a death sentence. Gemma was paralyzed. She couldn't walk. She couldn't move. She could barely speak. Her legs buckled like rags. The headaches were so intense that they elicited groans, even from a young woman who was already accustomed to suffering in silence. The doctors gave up on her. There was no treatment. There was no hope. Gemma, lying in a bed that seemed destined to become her tomb, did the only thing left for her to do: pray. She began a novena to Saint Gabriel of Our Lady of Sorrows, a young Passionist who had died a few years earlier, who had not yet been canonized, but whose reputation for holiness was spreading throughout Italy. Gemma made him a promise. If he cured her, she would consecrate her life to God in religious life, 9 days of prayer, 9 nights of supplication, each day weaker, each night closer to death. On the last night of the novena, something happened. Gemma got up. She got out of the bed where she had been lying for months. She stood on the legs that the doctors had declared dead. She walked without help, without a cane, without transition. Just a moment before, she couldn't move. The next, she was standing. The doctor who examined her the following morning found no trace of the illness. The inflamed membranes were healthy. Her nerves responded. Her muscles functioned perfectly. It was as if the meningitis had never existed. 19th century science had no explanation for this, and Gemma didn't seek one. She only knew she had made a promise, and now she must keep it. Chapter 4. The 5 Wounds. But God had other plans for her before the convent. Or rather, He had a different kind of convent in mind than Gemma imagined. On the night of June 8, 1899, Gemma was deep in prayer. She was 21 years old. She had been living an intensely spiritual life for months. Visions, ecstasies, conversations with her guardian angel that she described as casually as someone chatting with their roommate. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened that night. As she prayed, an inner flame began to consume her. A force, not her own, invaded her from within, like a fire that burns without destroying. She felt a sharp, excruciating pain in her hands, as if something were piercing them from one side to the other, then in her feet, then in her left side. When she looked down, she saw the blood. 5 open wounds, exactly in the places where the nails and the lance had wounded the body of Christ. Gemma didn't scream, she didn't run to show anyone. She remained still, staring at her own bloodied hands with a mixture of terror and adoration. What she had read about Saint Francis of Assisi, what she had meditated on 1,000 times regarding the Passion of Christ, was now written on her own flesh. The pattern established itself with a precision that baffled observers. Every Thursday night, the wounds would open. Blood flowed for hours, not in drops, but in a continuous stream, soaking the bandages that the Giannini family wrapped around her hands. The pain was intense, but Gemma bore it with a silence that witnesses described as superhuman. Throughout Friday and Saturday, the sores remained open, bleeding, visible, and every Sunday morning, sometimes during Mass, sometimes upon waking, the wounds would close, not gradually. Suddenly, the skin was left clean, without a scab, without a scar, without any mark, as if the hands that hours before had been a map of pain were now the untouched hands of any other young woman. Doctors came. Of course they came. Dr. Fanner examined her with clinical rigor. The wounds were real, penetrating the skin, reaching deep tissue, bleeding with authentic blood that could be analyzed under a microscope, but they followed no known pathological pattern. There was no infection, no peripheral inflammation, no necrotic process, and above all, no natural wound in the world closes completely in hours without leaving a trace. Science could describe what it saw, but it could not explain it. Gemma didn't want the stigmata. This is a fundamental truth that separates authentic mysticism from pretense. She didn't flaunt them. She didn't mention them unless asked. She hid them under bandages and gloves. She repeatedly asked God to take them away, not because she rejected suffering, but because the attention tormented her more than the wounds themselves. She wanted to be invisible. She wanted to be a nun. She wanted to disappear into a convent and pray for the world without the world watching her. But God had placed signs on her body that made invisibility impossible. The stigmata were only the beginning, or perhaps they were the door that opened a flood of phenomena that science could not contain. Ecstasies became frequent. Gemma would enter a state of total absorption in which her body became completely rigid, insensible to any external stimulus. Pins were stuck in her hands. She felt nothing. Flames were held to her skin. She didn't react. They shouted her name. She didn't hear. Her face, according to witnesses, acquired a beauty during these episodes that was not of this world, as if the light that illuminated her came from within, not from without. When she awoke, she remembered nothing of what had happened around her. She only remembered the presence of Christ, a presence so real, so concrete, so close, that everything else seemed like shadows. She spoke with her guardian angel, not in sporadic visions, nor in moments of special prayer, but in everyday life. While washing dishes, while sweeping the house, while walking through the streets of Lucca, the angel was there, visible to her, invisible to everyone else. Gemma gave him errands to take to her spiritual director. She asked him to intercede for the souls in purgatory. She scolded him affectionately when he was slow to fulfill a request. The Gianninis, who lived with her every day, became accustomed to seeing her speaking apparently alone, and to verifying later that the messages sent through the angel had reached their recipient with a precision that defied coincidence. The marks of flagellation appeared on her back, without anyone touching her. Red, deep furrows, like those left by a leather whip, were drawn on her skin during prayer. The sweating of blood covered her face in certain moments of spiritual intensity, a phenomenon medically recognized as hematidrosis. extremely rare but documented, that, however, in Gemma, occurred with a frequency and regularity that exceeded any clinical explanation. There were episodes of levitation observed by the Giannini family and by visitors who had no interest in fabricating miracles, and testimonies of bilocation, people in different places who claimed to have seen and spoken with Gemma at the same moment that she was demonstrably in Lucca. Each phenomenon was another layer of mystery, and each layer provoked the same divided reaction. Those who believed saw in Gemma a chosen one of God. Those who didn't believe saw a dangerous hysteric. There was no middle ground. With Gemma Galgani, indifference was impossible. Chapter 5. The Gianninis, ordinary witnesses to the extraordinary. And it is here that the story needs to pause on the people who made it possible for Gemma to survive. Not the illnesses, but the world. When the Galgani family fell apart, Gemma was literally left homeless. It was the Giannini family, Matthew, his wife Cecilia, and their children, who took her into their home in Lucca. Not out of mystical curiosity, nor out of interest in the phenomena. Out of Christian charity, the simplest and the rarest, they saw a young woman alone, and they opened the door for her. What they found inside that door surpassed everything they could have imagined. The Gianninis were front-row witnesses to the stigmata, the ecstasies, the conversations with the angel. They saw blood on the sheets and light on Gemma's face. They saw the mystic and the woman, because Gemma was both simultaneously. And that simultaneity is the most perplexing thing about her story. Outside of the extraordinary phenomena, Gemma was a normal young woman. She diligently helped with the household chores, cared for the Giannini children with motherly tenderness, and possessed a sharp sense of humor, dry, Tuscan, and sometimes unexpected. She ate little, slept even less, but when she was among family, she showed a joy that contrasted brutally with the image of the suffering mystic that the neighbors imagined. The Gianninis weren't living with a stained glass saint. They were living with a girl who washed clothes in the morning and levitated at night, and they loved her exactly as she was, because holiness, when it's authentic, doesn't push people away. It draws them in with the silent strength of what is true. The Giannini's testimony would be decisive in the canonization process, not because they were theologians or because they could explain what they saw, but precisely because they were ordinary people, describing the extraordinary with the simplicity of someone recounting what they had witnessed without embellishment. Their credibility rested in their ordinariness. No one could accuse a family of fanaticism, a family who had simply opened their home to an orphan and then found themselves living with a mystery they hadn't sought. Chapter 6. Rejection by the world and Father Germanus. But not everyone looked at Gemma through the eyes of the Gianninis. Rejection came from all directions, and it came with force. Doctors classified her as hysterical. It was the diagnosis du jour in 19th century Europe. Any woman with unexplainable symptoms could be labeled hysterical, and with that label, dismissed. Hysteria explained the stigmata as unconscious self-harm, the ecstasies as dissociative episodes, the visions as hallucinations. It was a convenient explanation that allowed them to close the case without having to confront the possibility of the supernatural. Some priests were distrustful. The devil, they said, can imitate holiness. He can fabricate false stigmata, provoke simulated ecstasies, and create the illusion of mystical phenomena to deceive the gullible and discredit the church. Ecclesiastical prudence, necessary and legitimate, turned, in some cases, into open hostility. The Archbishop of Lucca even forbade Gemma from receiving communion for a time, a measure that, for a woman whose entire life revolved around the Eucharist, was a suffering more acute than all the stigmata combined. The neighbors whispered. In a small town like Lucca, a young woman who bled without a wound and spoke with angels was a cause for scandal, ridicule, or fear, sometimes all three at once. People turned away from her on the street. Mothers pulled their children closer. Rumors multiplied with that sinister creativity that rumors have in small towns. And the most painful blow of all, the convents rejected her. To understand what that rejection meant to Gemma, you have to understand what the Passionists were and why she felt she'd been born for them. The Congregation of the Passion of Jesus Christ was founded in 1720 by St. Paul of the Cross, an Italian mystic who had received a singular mission: to keep alive in the Church the memory of Christ's suffering, not as historical data, nor as an abstract meditation, but as a living experience. The Passionists took a fourth vow, which no other religious order included: to meditate on and promote the memory of the Passion of our Lord, every day, every hour, every breath. The suffering of Christ was not for them an episode of the past. It was a present reality that continued in the members of his mystical body, in the sick, in the poor, in the persecuted, in all those who suffered without knowing that their pain could have a redemptive meaning. The Passionists dressed in black, with an emblem over their heart that bore the name of Jesus and a cross. They lived with extreme austerity, rigorous fasts, penitential discipline, prolonged silence. They were not an intellectual order, nor a missionary order in the conventional sense. They were contemplatives of pain, specialists of the cross, men and women who had chosen to stand at the foot of Calvary and not move from there. When Gemma discovered the Passionists, she recognized her own soul in that charism, everything she lived, the stigmata, the constant suffering. The contemplation of the Passion that absorbed her for hours was exactly what St. Paul of the Cross had founded his order to live. Gemma didn't need to learn Passionist spirituality. She had it etched into her flesh. She was Passionist before she knew the word, like someone who speaks a language without knowing that there's a grammar to explain it. But when she knocked on the door, the answer was no. Her health was too fragile. She had no dowry. The mystical phenomena complicated community life. The reasons were practical, understandable, even prudent. But for Gemma, each rejection was a sword that pierced her. The order that existed to contemplate the Passion rejected the woman who carried it written on her body. The irony was cruel, or perhaps it was providential, because Gemma would live the Passionist charism with a radicality that no cloister could have contained. And here is what's extraordinary. She never complained. She never protested. She never said, "You don't understand," or "God has chosen me and you despise me." She accepted each no with the same serenity with which she accepted the stigmata, as if the rejection of the world were just another wound, another participation in the passion of a Christ who was also rejected by his own. There was, however, one man who understood her. Father Germanus of St. Stanislaus, a Passionist, became her spiritual director and her most tenacious defender. He wasn't gullible. He was a man of rigorous formation who subjected Gemma to exhaustive interrogations, demanded absolute obedience, ordered her to write down everything she experienced, and analyzed each phenomenon with the meticulousness of a researcher seeking the truth, no matter where it led him. What he found convinced him. Not the phenomena themselves, those could have alternative explanations. What convinced him was the person. Gemma's radical humility, her instant obedience, her total lack of vanity, her fierce desire to go unnoticed, her ability to suffer without bitterness. Father Germanus had known many who claimed to have visions, but never anyone who lived them with such simplicity, with such absence of theatrics, with such transparency of soul. The phenomena could be debated. Gemma's holiness could not. It was Father Germanus who preserved the letters, the diaries, the testimonies that would allow the Church to study the case with rigor after Gemma's death. without his patient and meticulous work, the story of the young woman from Lucca would have been lost among the rumors and the doubts. Chapter 7, Gemma's own words. And it is here that we must allow Gemma to speak for herself, because until now we've talked about her, but she spoke too, and what she said reveals a soul of a depth that no outside observer could truly capture. Father Germanus ordered her to write, not as some literary exercise, but as an act of obedience. He wanted Gemma to record everything she experienced, the visions, the dialogues with Jesus, the ecstasies, the suffering. Gemma obeyed, as she always did, without argument, without questioning why. And what flowed from her pen was something that theologians still study today. A young woman, without formal education, without theological training, with no more schooling than the local parish and the prayers learned from her mother, who wrote about the deepest mysteries of the faith with a precision that would have put the scholars of even the Sorbonne to shame. In one of her letters to Father Germanus, she described the stigmata with a disarming simplicity. I found myself before Jesus on the cross. He invited me to kiss his wounds. I obeyed. Then I noticed that my hands, my feet, and my heart were pierced. I felt an intense pain, but in the midst of that pain, I experienced a peace that I cannot describe. There is no drama. There is no exhibitionism. There's no, look at me, I'm so special. There is a woman recounting what happened to her with the same naturalness as if she were describing a trip to the grocery store. And that naturalness is, paradoxically, the strongest sign of authenticity about her relationship with Jesus. She wrote something that mystics recognize as one of the most accurate descriptions of union with God ever put into writing. Jesus makes me understand that he loves me with an immense love and makes me feel how much he has suffered for me. But what moves me most is not what he has suffered. It is that he continues to suffer in the souls that reject him. Gemma did not contemplate the passion as an event of the past. She contemplated it as something that continues to happen. In every sin that wounds Christ, in every soul that turns away, in every heart that hardens, and that contemplation was what gave meaning to her own pain. She suffered with Christ, so that others would not have to suffer without him. Her diary also reveals a sense of humor that hagiographers often omit. When her guardian angel was slow to fulfill a request, she wrote to Father Germanus with a complaint, half serious, half amused. The angel is a little lazy today. When the mystical phenomena left her exhausted, she commented with the dry Tuscan wit, Jesus treats me like an old rag, but at least it's a clean rag. These glimpses of humanity are fundamental because they reveal that Gemma was not some ethereal creature disconnected from the world. She was a young woman with her feet firmly planted on the ground, even if those feet sometimes lifted off it without her being able to stop them. The most impressive thing about her writings is what they don't say. There are no complaints against those who rejected her, no bitterness toward the doctors who called her a hysteric, no resentment against the convents that slammed their doors in her face, not a line, not a word, as if resentment was a language that her soul simply did not know. Chapter 8. Death, Glory, and the Lingering Question. Consumption arrived as it always does, slowly, relentlessly, with the patience of one who knows they have all the time in the world. The same disease that had taken her mother, the same that had killed her brother Gino. Now it was coming for her. Gemma's last months were an ordeal that would have terrified even the bravest souls. Her body wasted away, her cough tore blood from her lungs, fever wrapped her in a shroud of fire that would not be extinguished. The pain was so intense that the Giannini family, who cared for her day and night, sometimes had to leave the room because they couldn't bear to see her suffer. But when the physical suffering reached its most brutal peak, something changed in Gemma's face. A peace that did not belong to this world settled over her features, like a light from another place. The ecstasies continued. In the midst of agony, Gemma found moments of union with God, so intense that the illness seemed irrelevant, as if the body were just a shell, and what was happening inside was too great for any pain to contain. She did not ask for the suffering to cease. She asked for more. Jesus, more pain. They heard her whisper in one of her last ecstasies. It wasn't masochism. It was love. The love of one who has understood that every drop of suffering accepted with faith becomes grace for the souls who do not know or cannot ask for themselves. Gemma did not suffer for the sake of suffering. She suffered for others, and in that suffering for others, she found a meaning that transformed the pain of destruction into an offering. On April 11th, 1903, Holy Saturday, Gemma Galgani closed her eyes for the last time. She was 25 years old. She died in the Giannini's home, not in a convent, because none would accept her. She died poor. She had nothing. She died rejected by the world, but embraced by the few who truly knew her. And she died on Holy Saturday, the day Christ lies in the tomb, the day that lies between death and resurrection, the quietest day of the liturgical calendar, as if God had reserved for her last day, the day most like her, a day of silence, of waiting, of faith in the darkness, suspended between the Friday of sorrow and the Sunday of glory. The world was quick to recognize what it had despised. The cause for beatification opened with unusual speed. The testimonies of the Giannini family, of Father Germanus, of the doctors who had examined her, of the priests who had observed her during her ecstasies, formed a record that the Church studied with the meticulousness that these processes require. Every miracle was scrutinized, every phenomenon analyzed, every testimony cross-referenced. In 1933, Pope Pius V declared her blessed. In 1940, Pius V canonized her, pronouncing over her a judgment that summarizes an entire life, the purest flower of the Passionists. The young woman whom no Passionist convent had accepted was now recognized as the most perfect embodiment of the Passionist charism. The contemplation of the Passion of Christ, taken not to theory or distant meditation, but to her own flesh. Her body rests today in the Passionist sanctuary in Lucca, in the church that bears her name. Pilgrims come from all over Italy and from around the world to pray before her relics, the same pilgrims who a century earlier would have crossed the street to avoid meeting her. The Passionist nuns, the same ones who said no to her entry, now guard her memory with devotion. History has its ironies and Providence has its own. Gemma Galgani was canonized as a virgin, not as a religious sister, because she never became one. It's a distinction that speaks volumes. The Church doesn't honor her for what she did or for the phenomena she experienced. It honors her for what she was. A woman who loved God with a love so total, so exclusive, so devoid of calculation that her body simply couldn't contain it any longer and began to overflow in visible signs. The stigmata weren't a prize, they were a consequence, just as tears are a consequence of an emotion too great to be contained within. If you could visit the Giannini home in Lucca, the house where Gemma spent her final years, where she bled and prayed, washed clothes, and played with the children, spoke with angels, and ultimately passed away, you'd find a simple room, a bed, a crucifix, a window overlooking a Tuscan courtyard where the lemon trees still bloom. And you would find the question that Gemma leaves in the soul of everyone who comes close to her story. Can suffering have meaning? Can pain, real pain, the kind that shatters the body and squeezes the heart, be something more than just punishment, an accident, or something utterly absurd? Gemma answered with her life, not with words. She wasn't one for grand speeches either. She answered with her open flesh and her soul at peace. She answered by saying yes to the pain she didn't choose, just as Our Lady said yes to the mission she didn't seek. She answered by showing that there's a way to suffer that doesn't destroy but transforms, that doesn't embitter but purifies, that doesn't distance you from God but unites you to Him with an intimacy that those who are healthy cannot imagine. You don't need to have stigmata to understand, Gemma. You just need to have suffered. You just need to have lost someone. You just need to have hit rock bottom and discovered that, at rock bottom, God was waiting. Gemma teaches us that holiness isn't for the strong. It's for those who let God be strong in their weakness. That grace doesn't seek perfect vessels. It seeks broken vessels, because it's through the cracks that the light enters. Saint Gemma Galgani, virgin, flower of sorrows, stigmatized by love, rejected by the world, and embraced by heaven. Pray for us. Pray for those who suffer without understanding why. Pray for those who feel rejected by everyone. Pray for the sick who offer their pain in silence, and teach us that the deepest wounds of the soul can become, if we place them in God's hands, the gateways through which eternity enters.